Hello and welcome everyone to the Midnight Gallery. My name is Robin Hostick. I'm a landscape painter living in the Pacific Northwest, and this is a really special show tonight for a couple reasons. First of all, it's the debut of the Midnight Gallery, which is what you see behind me. This is a pop-up gallery that I've created out of necessity. Crazy times call for creative solutions, so it's not perfect, but we'll see how this goes. The second reason, and the most important reason that this is special, is because this show is a partnership between me and Oregon Wild. And Oregon Wild is a statewide nonprofit in Oregon which has worked for over 40 years to preserve what is really special and wild and beautiful about our state. So the focus of this show and the artworks you see behind me, 6 out of the 7 at least, is to showcase wild and scenic Oregon rivers. Now, we have a few rivers in Oregon that have the federal wild and scenic designation, which gives them certain protections. And unfortunately, there are many, many other wild, scenic, very beautiful and special rivers in Oregon that are not protected. So in Oregon, our Senator Wyden is planning to introduce, hopefully this year, legislation that will extend protections to additional rivers in Oregon. And the whole purpose of this partnership between me and Oregon Wild is to create artwork that expresses the beauty of some of these beautiful rivers, and to try to show you a little bit of what it's like to be on these waterways today, and to give you the opportunity to bring that artwork into your life. Part of my goal as an artist is to bring people joy through art, and especially connecting to the natural world, which of course I think is just fundamental to our lives, and it's also fundamental to our happiness. So that's a big goal of mine as an artist, and it's also to do good. I spend the vast majority of my free time in the wilds, exploring beautiful places and just being in the presence of nature, and combining that with artwork and sharing that with others is just a very powerful and meaningful thing for me. So this is a really special partnership. I can't wait to share the works with you. So we'll just go ahead and jump in, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of the works as we go along. This is the North Fork of the Crooked River, very famous river in Oregon, absolutely beautiful. It's also a long river, a tributary of the Deschutes, and it flows through eastern Oregon through many different landscapes, including the Ochakos. And the headwaters, which this is very close to the headwaters, are really interesting and really special. So what I've tried to do with this painting series is really capture the unique qualities of each one of these rivers. Now, you can visit rivers in a lot of different places in the world, and some places may feel kind of like another, but each river has a personality, just like each place in the wild has a certain personality and a feel to it that's different from any other place. So what I've tried to do with each one of these paintings is include elements that really capture what that river is all about, and to include those in one scene. So this is a real place. So some of the things that characterize and make the North Fork Crooked River really special is that it flows through this volcanic landscape of rim rocks with this beautiful ponderosa forests surrounding it. And the combination of the forest and the river is really what makes a lot of these places special. And some of the protections that are offered with the Wild and Scenic River designation also extend to the forest surrounding the river. So that's an added benefit. Now, this painting right here shows the river coming around a bend. It's flowing through the rim rocks. You have the ponderosa pines. You have light shining down across the rim rocks, and then you can see the light as it shines down into the kind of the shallow waters. Now, the North Fork Crooked River is a fairly shallow river. It's fairly warm, And there's a species of trout that lives in these kind of warmer waters that's really special. It's the native red band trout, is what it's called. And so in these little pockets and undercut banks and behind these rocks, this is where these trout live. They're in this stretch right here. And another thing that I'll point out about some of the paintings is that you're really in the place, okay? You're not looking at it from a distance, but you're really there. You can see the water flowing around the bend and then coming towards you. You can see down into the water. You can see the different types of vegetation that are growing here. And all that is expressed in oil paint. These are all oil paintings on canvas, and that's all expressed with brush strokes that use vibrant colors that are very true to the actual place. And the different patterns, they're fairly simple patterns actually, but in combination they express the feeling and the motion and the activity of that living landscape. So this is a large painting. It's 40 inches wide by 30 inches tall. It's large enough to really stand out in any kind of a room or space, even a very large space. So this is a special place. I spent many days out here exploring the area and really trying to find a scene that characterizes that river. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is actually the first painting that I created in the series. This is the South Fork McKenzie River. And I think many Oregonians have heard of the McKenzie River. It's very famous. It's actually it's a stunning waterway for recreation, for fishing, for habitat value, for all kinds of reasons. It also happens to be the water source for hundreds of thousands of people. And for good reason. This water is incredibly clean and incredibly clear. And in this particular scene, which is way up near the headwaters of the McKenzie River, you can see a few things that really sort of are characteristic of this place. First, you have this beautiful old growth forest kind of towering over the river. And you can see how it's dark inside the forest and there's just a little bit of light coming through here and there. On the other side of the river, the sunlight is pouring in and hitting the tops of some of these very large trees. And this is in spring. So when I spent time out exploring this river, which I've done over many years, but most recently in the spring, the growth on the alder trees here along the banks was just starting to pop out. And it was bright, sunshine hitting kind of the chartreuse buds and leaves just starting to pop out. And so it really glows, right, even in the middle of the day. And you can see that reflected in the water, which comes around this bend and reflects some of the bright sunlight and some of the sky. And then you see the reflection of these trees, and then you begin to see down into the water as it flows swiftly down through this riffle. So this really characterizes what it feels like to be there. And there's little sparkles of sunlight here and there, just little details, very simple, but that's what makes painting such a great medium for expressing the landscape. There's movement, there's life, there's color. It's not just a documentation, right? It's an expression. And yet, at the same time, as we know, the landscape changes all the time, right? We have windstorms, we have fires, we have, disease and insects, floods. This waterway will probably not look exactly like this in the future, even next year maybe, I don't know. Things are going to change. So, in a way, it is a documentation, but it's an expressive documentation. So, it captures how I feel about it. It captures more the sense of being there. And it's also just a very iconic place in Oregon. So let's go ahead and move on to the next painting. This is the Alsee River. And the Alsee River, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is a coastal river in the central part of Oregon around Corvallis. It flows from the Coast Range all the way out to the coast. So some of the things that make the Alsee River really special, in addition to being a fantastic steelhead river and having this incredible forest surrounding it, it's just the nature of the river itself. When you're there, it starts, even though you're in the Coast Range and you're up in the mountains a little bit and in the woods, it starts to feel coastal, right? There's moss hanging from the trees. The smell of the underbrush has got kind of that earthy smell that you get towards the coast. And the character of the river is different too. So if you look down into the water, which, like some of the other paintings, this one allows you to see into the water, okay? So there's kind of a clay bottom on the waterway, which the mountains around there's a lot of clay soils, and they come down here and sort of settle in around the rocks. There are also gravel beds where the fish spawn, but this is very characteristic of the river, this color and these kinds of patterns in the rocks. You can see there's moss on the rocks, there's moss hanging from the trees. The vegetation, you can see how the brush strokes and the colors just sort of show it flowing through here and moving through the painting, right? And of course the light is coming through. It's almost like an archway of branches from these old alder trees and these old maples with the conifer forest up behind it, and this light pouring down through here and kind of illuminating. It just kind of glows, like the whole place is glowing, right? And so the painting really tries to capture that sense of what it's like to be there. And again, the combination of the forest and the river, you have the river stepping down over these riffles, and then the main current flows along this other bank, and it kind of moves over here along this other kind of quieter bank. So again, this is a large painting. It's 40 inches wide, 30 inches tall. It's the oil paints actually that all these paintings are created with are they're very high quality, rich paints, and so the light that reflects into the paint and back out of it, it glows in a way that, for example, even though high quality prints do a very good job, the original is always going to feel different. It's going to feel really special in a room. And as it changes, one of the signs that I find, if the lighting is right in the painting, as the light changes, even if it's dark and you come into a dark room and you see the painting on the wall, it looks like moonlight, right? So that's one thing to look forward to when you own a painting like this. So let me show you the edges. Come around here for a sec. So all of these paintings have a special treatment on the edge. Now this is whatever color is present on the front of the painting carries back along the edges towards the back of the painting like this, and it creates a really nice finished edge that when you see it, it kind of leads your eye into what's going on here. It's very harmonious. I think it's one of the best ways to present an oil painting. These canvases are all gallery quality canvas. It's 1.5 inches thick. They're very high quality, durable canvas, and will last forever, basically, with care, and should really be unchanged, especially if it's hung in a location that's protected from ultraviolet light. Very durable piece of artwork. Okay, I think that's a wrap for this painting. Let's move on to the next one. This painting here is of Fall Creek. And Fall Creek, for anyone who's not familiar with it, it flows down out of the Cascade Mountains on the west side of the Cascades, not too far from Eugene and Springfield. And it's a really beautiful waterway. And the interesting thing about this one, for me personally, is that I actually have 8mm film of my grandparents back in 1945 playing in Fall Creek. My grandma's there in this red bathing suit. It was actually color film. I didn't know that existed in 1945, but it did somehow. In any case, so I would be the third generation of my family to really have a relationship with this river. And I've fished there, I've played there, we've gone hiking out there as a family many times. So it's a really special place. Like many rivers across the state are, they're very special to a lot of people. And that's why the wild and scenic designation is so important, and why we're running this campaign. So this river is unique in a few ways. First of all, like many Western Cascades River, it flows through this incredible towering old growth forest. You can see that expressed here. There's very dark trees on either side, kind of framing this opening where the water comes through here. And you can see into that forest, you can see it in the background. It's very dark and enclosing. And the river itself, sometimes you can't even really, you have to kind of get glimpses of it. But the interesting thing about the river is the color of the bottom in the riverbanks is almost like a rainbow. So you can see, if you maybe come in here just a little bit closer, you can see how there's some darker colors and some turquoise coming through here. And then there's these kind of ochre colored banks, and some are sort of reddish and even a little bit purple looking in the shallows where you have more rocks. This is really unique. There are other rivers that are kind of like that, but it just struck me how colorful and beautiful the bottom of the river is. So it's not just that a river is blue, right? Water is almost never blue. Water is the color of the things that are on the bottom, and water is, especially if it's really clear like this one. And it's also the color of what's reflected on it. So that's an interesting thing about this painting. You have the patterns of hanging moss everywhere. You have light coming through from the side, illuminating the far banks. And again, this is in the springtime. So there are buds coming out on some of these trees along the banks, the deciduous trees, and they're just capturing that early spring sunlight. And of course, in the foreground, you have fallen trees and you have vegetation growing up and starting to leaf out. So this painting here is it's 36 inches wide by 24 inches tall. Again, it's using high quality oil paint on a stretched gallery profile canvas, 1.5 inches thick. And the edges are all painted, as I mentioned earlier. So just a word about how I work and do these paintings. So even though the painting itself, I try to keep it fresh. I like a fresh, loose quality in the work, right? I don't ever want it to feel overworked or heavy or belabored. Oil paint sometimes can feel heavy depending on how it's used. These feel very fresh. By doing that, by keeping it fresh and keeping it quick, there's a lot of energy contained in the painting. Okay, now if you work too much on it, things tend to kind of get static and rounded off, and I don't want that. That's not the style that I'm after. So every artist's style is continually evolving. Mine will too, but this is the direction that I'm moving right now. And you'll also notice something about this painting. There's a lot of little bits of red showing through here around some of these bits and pieces if you come in close again. So if you look right up in here, there's little bits of red here and here and here. And the reason for that is that there's an underpainting under the entire thing, which helps do two things. One is the underpainting unifies the color scheme. Now the colors I use are very true to what's actually there. I use a combination of what's called apparent color. So it's kind of how the eye perceives colors. So I may intensify some kinds of colors and back other ones off. And local color, which is the color that you see reflected off of an object. So using a combination of them and not just making it up. Trees are hardly ever green, for example, just like water is hardly ever blue, right? Sure, there are green trees, but they're combinations of brown, yellow, blue, and even red. And when your eye looks at a tree and sees green, you close your eyes and you see red. So when you include red as a complement of green, it brings the whole painting to life in a way that it just would not if you didn't include that. So that's something that I try to do in all my work. And even though the underpainting is different for every painting, depending on the color scheme, it's usually present. So we'll move on to the next painting. So this painting is of Gwin Creek. And Gwin Creek is a very small coastal stream. It's kind of close to the little town of Yachats, north of Florence. And it's tucked into an incredibly beautiful primeval forest. And this place is like the land that time forgot. So we were out here exploring. I've been here a number of times over the years, but this last spring, early summer, when we were exploring, it was just amazing. There were ferns as tall as your head. There were trees as big around as grain silos, I kid you not. And the coastal wind was blowing. There's a salty breeze. There were elk moving around everywhere through the ferns and in the lowland areas. It's just an incredible place. And of course, this is also a candidate for a wild and scenic designation because it is a very wild place. And this painting expresses some of how it feels to be in that place. It's very energetic, very big, makes you feel kind of small. Really, it does. So this is looking up the creek, and there are a few things. It's hard to tell scale because everything there is so big. There's this gigantic old maple tree that's growing down off of this fern-covered cliff right here. There's forest up behind it that's kind of leaning out over the river. And the river itself, at this point, it comes through a riffle, and then it's kind of calm, and it spreads out under the branches of this maple tree. And you can see that it reflects the light coming through the forest here, through the tree, is reflected in the kind of just the rippling waters. And the other thing that I find really interesting and compelling about this painting is, again, even though you see into the water a little bit along the edge, the water is a little bit kind of almost a tea color, right? And when the light comes through and hits the water, it lights it up in these little patches, right? Like you can see little patches here and here, and then over in this corner, there's a few more patches of light coming through. And that just gives it this incredible warmth, even though it's kind of this, this dank, mossy forest. It still feels really warm in this particular condition. Now, of course, the light's pouring in here at this time of day. You have ferns on this bank. You have ferns growing up on this bank over here. You have kind of a muddy bank, and there's an old log that's fallen across the river. And these trees over here, actually, it's a younger stand of alder. And the reason that those are there, in addition to all this old growth, is that these are on a kind of a floodplain in the river. And so when the rains come pounding down on the coast, there's no dam or anything on this river, so they just pour down through there, through all the moss and trees, and they flood these banks. And sometimes a big flood will come by and kind of clear out. The trees will fall over, and then other things pop up. And so the floodplains, even though they're small along this creek, they're very dynamic. And so that's why these smaller alder trees have popped up. And the sun coming through the trees just lights them up in such a beautiful way. And then, of course, you get this look up into the sky that's just sort of, the branches. There's a lot of the brushwork here expresses the movement of all this branches and just the coastal breeze. And you get a sense for how clear and crisp that coastal air is above the stream. So, yeah, this is another large painting. It's 30 inches tall by 40 inches wide. It's painted using high-quality oil paints. It's on a gallery profile canvas, also very high-quality, durable canvas. And it's really a showpiece. I think it would look great in a lot of locations. It would bring a lot of life and energy into a room, into a space. Another thing that I just want to mention about the paintings and how I operate is, I mentioned earlier that when you see some artwork of rivers and landscapes in particular, sometimes they're kind of from a distance, right? You see hills or mountains or clouds and that sort of thing. And those are wonderful, and I paint those too. Rivers, especially in Western Oregon and Central Oregon and Southern Oregon, as we'll see, a lot of rivers in Oregon flow through mountains and forests, right? And so the feeling of being on the river is a much more kind of an intimate experience, right? So to express that all the time, the many hours that I spent out exploring these places, looking for that place that feels like, okay, this really says something about this river, right? This expresses this particular river's personality, right? It's almost like a portrait. Like if you were to take a portrait, make a portrait of a human being, right? They're a certain age, they're dressed a certain way, they look a certain way, and it all has to do with where they are in their lives. And so it's like a snapshot of them in their life. Well, these are portraits of the wild, right? So this is a snapshot of a place, a real place, and it's going to change. It will never be the same. And yet this is how it is now, really shown in its best light and its best qualities. And it's basically preserved, in essence, through art and expressed through art. And the point that I was going to make in kind of a roundabout way is that the feeling of being in the place is very important. So having foreground, you actually see into the water, you see into the middle ground, you see into the trees, things are moving, things are happening, you're there, right? So a painting like this in your home, in your office, you know, in any kind of environment where you spend time is like having a window into this incredibly beautiful place at an incredibly beautiful time. It's kind of idealized, and it expresses something really special that you get to experience every day. So, of course, that's part of my goal as an artist, is to bring people joy by bringing the beauty of the natural world into our lives every day. So we'll move on to the next one. This painting is of the South Umpqua River. Now, this Umpqua River, I think lots of people know about the Umpqua. We've heard about it. There's ice cream named after the Umpqua. It's an amazing river, and there are multiple branches of it. The North Umpqua is world famous for steelhead fishing and rafting and all kinds of things. I've spent a lot of time there as well. This is the South Umpqua River, and this is another candidate for wild and scenic designation. It's an extremely beautiful river. It's close to my heart because I grew up in Southern Oregon, and this is more towards the southern end of the state. It's warmer, it's drier. The climate is just different from Western Oregon. It's different from Central and Eastern Oregon. It's really its own special place. And there are a few things about the South Umpqua that just grab you right away. And one of the things that I find really compelling is the color of the water. It's this amazing emerald green color. And this is really how it looks. You see down into the water. It's very clear, very clean, and yet it's green. It's like a flowing gem in a way. You just want to jump into it, especially because it's so hot down there most of the time. Now, this is late spring, probably June-ish, I guess. It must have been around June. You have vegetation bursting and the sunlight hitting all that vegetation kind of in the middle of the day at the time when the light is just pouring down into the water. Now there's still shadows behind these cliffs over here, right? So there's a little bit of mystery and depth in the water, and you can see these rocks that are sticking out just a little bit and how they kind of go down into that deeper green water, and these other rocks here. So that's the other thing that's really striking about this river, is all the interesting rock formations that it flows through. And you'll notice that the rock formations here are kind of an orange color, right? They're really a warm color. And it's like, kind of looks like the Southwest, and what kind of rock is that? Well, it's actually not the rock that's the color, it's the moss that's growing on the rock. So, you know, in the fall and the winter and the spring, when the mosses are wet and they're growing and thriving, they're green, right? They look like more moss. But then in the spring, they bloom and they have these little seed heads. And then the sun comes out in this area and just bakes them dry really quickly, very quickly. And then they take on this kind of an orange color. And that's really how it looks. So it's the vegetation on top of the rocks that give them this special color. So the combination of that with this green river makes for just kind of a very stunning landscape. And again, the river flows through this beautiful old growth forest. You have ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, and you have hemlock and a whole variety of trees that grow in this part of the state. This area actually right near here was also burned not too long ago, so the landscape is changing very quickly, as it is in all of these places that are expressed in these paintings. So again, the brushwork and the energy of the painting is very characteristic of what I'm aiming for in the style. You can see the motion in the trees over here and there, and then over here. That's because this place is alive, it's dynamic, it's moving. Through the medium of art, you can actually express the dynamic nature of the landscape. And so that's one of the things that I'm really aiming for. So that's a wrap on the Midnight Gallery. I hope you've enjoyed it. I just want to say thanks for joining me. These paintings are going to be on sale. The originals that I've showed you tonight, in addition to limited edition prints in 2 different sizes, will be available beginning in November. There will be a launch in cooperation with Oregon Wild, and we'll try to send all that information out to folks. You can buy the paintings directly. Shipping is completely free. They'll be shipped to your doorstep. Whether it's an original painting, it will be insured, packaged very securely, and shipped to your doorstep free. And the same goes for the prints. I'll talk a little bit more later about the prints in a different episode of the Midnight Gallery. With the originals and with the special edition prints, you get a certificate of authenticity that is basically, it's kind of like the title to your car, except it's a title to your artwork. It proves where it came from, it proves that it's authentic, and for you as an art collector or an art buyer or an art appreciator, it gives you confidence later if you go to pass the work on, or if you would like to sell it at some point in the future. That's a very important thing for you to have. It adds to the value of your artwork. And it in itself is actually a little work of art, as you'll see. So remember, 25% of proceeds from any of the originals or any of the prints of this special project in partnership with Oregon Wild will be donated directly to Oregon Wild to help them with their efforts to promote the Wild and Scenic River designation. So this is legislation that's going before Congress. We want to build support for that. We want to make sure that people are aware of it. We want to help people understand what the Wild and Scenic River designation means, and Oregon Wild will be talking more about that specifically. And we want to make sure that the incredible riches of natural beauty that we enjoy in Oregon and that we've enjoyed for many generations will continue for our kids and our kids' kids and future generations. So that's the whole purpose of this. And again, thank you for watching.